equals 10x cubed plus 32x squared minus 34x minus 8? If so, write p of x as a product of two factors. So this means if it says if so, that means you have to find the product, you rewrite p of x as a product of two factors. So we can use synthetic division here, since we have a binomial and my a value is 1 with a degree of 1. So let's write it out. We have 10x cubed plus 32x squared minus 34x minus 8 divided by x plus 4. I can show in 3 ways. I'll do synthetic first. So remember, we have to flip the sign here, make it negative 4, because if we equal it to 0, x equals negative 4. And then here we bring down our coefficients, 10, 32, negative 34, and negative 8. And let's go ahead and solve it. We always bring down the first term. So it's 10. And then we multiply here. 10 times negative 4 is negative 40. 32 minus 40, that's negative 8. So in here, we add or subtract. So that's negative 8. Next, we continue multiplying by our divisor here, which is 10 times negative 4, which makes it positive 32. And we are left with negative 2 here. Same thing, we continue multiplying by negative 4, becomes positive 8. Negative 8 minus 8 is 0. Then we bring down our variables here. Instead of x cubed, it will be 1 less exponent, x squared. And then it continues to x, and then there's no more variable, and the last number will always be your remainder. Since our remainder is 0, it is indeed a factor. So x plus 4 is a factor because the remainder equals 0. So now, don't forget the last step, we have to write it in a factor, and as a product of two factors. So what does that mean? First, we take our divisor, which is x plus 4, and we get the quotient, which is 10x squared minus 8x minus 2. And this would be your solution. Okay. If you have any questions, please let me know. Now I'm going to show you the second way to do it, which is long division. So let's start over. In long division, you don't have to change the sign of our divisor. So we have to figure out how to cancel the first term each time using our first term in our divisor. So x times what is 10x cubed, we know as 10x squared. So we multiply it to the first one. 10x squared times x is 10x cubed. 10 times 4 is positive 40x squared. Now we have to subtract just like regular long division, and we distribute the negative. So what I tell you guys is we can just flip the sign and think of it as distributing the negative. So we have negative 10 here, and this becomes negative 40. So then we are left with negative 8 x squared. We bring down the next one, negative 34x. Okay, next one is what multiplies x multiplied with what? We get negative 8x squared. We know as negative 8x. So make sure you keep the sign of whatever this first term is here. So as a student, I kept getting confused, but I remembered you have to keep the sign of this first term here. So negative 8x times x, that's negative 8x squared. Negative 8x times positive 4. Remember, we have to multiply to both terms here, which becomes negative 32x. And then we would distribute the negative, which would make the signs flip. That cancels here. We are left with negative 2x minus 8. Bring this down here. Same thing, whatever the sign is, we start off here. So negative 2x times, what do I multiply x with to get negative 2x? It's negative 2. So we multiply negative 2 times x and negative 2 times 4, which is negative 2x minus 8. And then we distribute the negative, which would make it flip the signs here. And we come up with no remainders. So therefore, x plus 4 again is a factor because the remainder is 0. So that means, again, we cannot neglect the second question here. Write it as a product of two factors. So what does that mean? I get my divisor times my quotient. So that's x plus 4, 10x squared minus 8x minus 2. So yes, x plus 4 is a factor. Okay? Alright, so here's the third way of figuring out if it is a factor. So what you do is what's called the factor theorem. The factor theorem tells us that if we plug in the number, if it equals to 0, then it is indeed a factor. So using factor theorem, we just have x plus 4. We find the 0 here. So we get that x equals negative 4. And then we plug it into p of x here, which becomes 10 times negative 4 to the third power. So you just rewrite your equation by plugging in negative 4 times negative 4 minus 8. Again, I tell you guys that whenever you plug in something, always put parentheses around it. So then you use a calculator, and in the end you will get that p of negative 4 is equal to 0. So yes, x plus 4 is a factor by factor theorem. But doing the factor theorem does not necessarily tell us how to write it as a product of two factors. So that's why I showed you the synthetic division and long division first. But in the case that it does not equals 0, so let's pretend it equals 4, the answer would be no, x plus 4 is not a factor. Therefore, you cannot do this second question here. So this is the benefit of doing the factor theorem, but I prefer doing the synthetic or long division first before answering this question. If in any case, if this was not part of the question, then I would totally do this first to if you have a little bit of time. Okay, but please do the synthetic division or long division, whichever one you prefer.